I spent years preparing to fight the enemy. I trained to hate them, to imagine them as monsters. But on one cold morning in 1944, in a ruined French village, everything I thought I knew about war collapsed. This is the story of the day I met the enemy I didn't hate, the day I realized this war was bigger, stranger, and crueler than anything we were told. The orders were simple. Clear the village, secure the crossroads. Expect resistance. We moved into Saint-Martin just after dawn. Fog rolled low across the rubble, twisting between shattered roofs and burned-out carts. It didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a place the world had forgotten. As we spread out, searching house to house, I noticed something strange. No gunfire, no movement, just quiet. A heavy, uncomfortable quiet. Then we found the cellar. Corporal Jenkins lifted the hatch and froze. Inside were 3 civilians, a woman, an elderly man, and a boy young enough to still sleep with a stuffed animal. They weren't French. They were German. The old man lifted his hands. The woman shielded the boy with her body. "Soldiers?" she asked in a shaking voice. "American?" We weren't trained for this part. We searched the room. No weapons, no uniforms, nothing but a single suitcase and a loaf of stale bread wrapped in cloth. They weren't our mission. They weren't a threat. But they were the enemy. At least, that's what we had been told. Regulations said civilians were to be detained and handed over for processing. But this felt different. These people weren't fleeing from us. They were fleeing something else. As we escorted them into the street, the boy tugged my sleeve. "Please," he whispered. "They're coming." I knelt beside him. "Who's coming?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We heard the engines before we saw them, a low rumble growing louder through the fog. German armor. But something was wrong. The civilians weren't relieved. They were terrified. That's when the old man finally spoke. "Not Wehrmacht," he said. "Not regular army. These men, they follow their own rules." It wasn't the armored division we expected. It was a punitive detachment, the kind that left no witnesses. Suddenly, everything became clear. These civilians weren't running from the Allies. They were running from their own side. We took defensive positions, machine guns behind rubble, rifles pointed toward the narrow road leading into town. The fog thickened, swallowing the outlines of the buildings until we were trapped in a world of gray. Then shapes emerged, German soldiers moving slowly, methodically, like they had all the time in the world. They weren't charging. They weren't shouting. They were hunting. Their commander carried no insignia, just a black coat and gloves too clean for the front. He walked up the road as if he owned the earth. Behind him, his men dragged civilians, French, German, anyone, from basements and barns, anyone who would slow them down, anyone who might talk. We weren't their target. Not yet. But we were standing between them and their prey. Lieutenant Harris whispered, "Orders?" We had 2 choices. Let them pass, pretend we didn't see, didn't hear, didn't understand. Or stand our ground, knowing we were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing men who didn't fear death because they no longer understood life. I looked at the boy, holding his mother's hand, shaking like a leaf in winter. And for the first time in this war, I realized something terrifying. The enemy wasn't a uniform. The enemy wasn't a nation. The enemy was what people became when the world stopped holding them accountable. "We hold the line," I said. We opened fire. The street lit up with muzzle flashes, echoes slamming off stone walls. The first wave fell quickly, surprised, unprepared for resistance. But the commander didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand. A second wave moved in, then a third. The ground shook as more engines approached. Soon it wasn't a firefight. It was survival. During a lull, I saw him, the commander, standing alone in the open, staring at us through the fog. Not angry, not afraid, just curious. He walked forward slowly, ignoring bullets snapping past. Then he did something I'll never forget. He pointed at the German boy behind us and yelled, "Bring him to me!" It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. He didn't see a child, he saw a liability. Harris whispered, "He'll kill him. You know he will." And I did. The commander raised his pistol. That was the moment I realized this wasn't war anymore. This was murder wearing a uniform. I fired. He fell without a sound, and everything changed. His men hesitated just long enough for our reinforcements to arrive. Armored support rolled in, guns blazing. The punitive detachment broke, scattering into the fog. The boy was safe. We were alive. But the village was gone. We handed the civilians over to the Red Cross. The mother thanked us in broken English. The old man cried quietly and refused to let go of my hand. The boy? He just stared at me with a look I didn't understand. It took me years to figure it out. He wasn't looking at a soldier. He wasn't looking at an American. He was looking at a man who had a choice, and chose him. That day taught me something I couldn't learn in training, couldn't read in a manual, couldn't see on a map. War isn't good versus evil. It's people trying to survive forces bigger than them. Sometimes the enemy is the man pointing a rifle at you. Sometimes it's the man pointing one at a child. And sometimes the enemy is the part of yourself that wants to look away. On that day, in a ruined village far from home, I finally understood what we were really fighting for. Not victory, not glory, humanity.